I go over around Castroville and find a mountain laurel growing in deep soil, and the majority of that plant's roots are concentrated very close to the base of a plant. In real rocky soil, or especially where there's a shelf of rock underneath, you are totally wasting your time to try to transplant a plant. Because on that shallow hill country soil, if we got a root ball that was this big around, we'd probably get less than 10% of the roots of the plants. If we were digging that plant in deeper soil, we'd probably get 60 or 70% of the roots of the plant. The one where you got 60 or 70% of the root, you'd have a fair chance of making it. The one with the smaller root system, zero chance of making it. And to try to transplant a mountain laurel is the most difficult plant in Texas, I believe, to transplant, and I would never do it. I would never recommend that you buy bald and burlap mountain laurels. Even the professionals probably lose a third of them. Now, professional means you have a sign on the side of your pickup truck and have a shovel. It doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. By the end of the day today, you all will probably know more than about half the people that pass themselves off as professionals. But long answer to a short question, don't try to transplant much of anything woody this time of year, and don't ever try to transplant mountain laurels because your chance of success is very, very minimal. If you do transplant things, remember what Super Thrive is. This is the hokiest packaging in the world, and I'm sure most of y'all have seen it, because you hear me talk about it all the time. But world champion, activator, reviver, transplanter, extra grower, perfector, original, gold medal, the original. The guy that makes this stuff is as strange as his packaging, but the stuff is just really, really good. It's an anti-shock material. Don't throw your money away on root stimulator. Root stimulator has a rooting hormone in it that's like 1/10,000th of 1%, which is not enough to do much good at all. Plus it has a high phosphorus chemical fertilizer. This has a lot of vitamins. It has, I guess, some hormones. Who knows what all Dr. Thompson puts in there. But that is the best root stimulator I've ever found. If you want to give things a good start when you are planting, use it. I'll use mountain laurels for an example. The guys over at Fannick's Nursery bring in mountain laurels every year. They pot them into containers, and as they should, they grow them for at least 6 months before they sell them, so that they're sure that they're beyond that danger of losing from being initially transplanted. Mike was telling me that they used to lose about 40% of their mountain laurels, even with the very best of care. And I mean, these guys' oldest nursery, I'm sure, in San Antonio, people that knew what they were doing were still losing 40% of their plants. I told them to start using this and watering the mountain laurels in when they put them in containers. He told me recently, the past 3 or 4 years since they've been doing that, they lose about 1 out of 100. So going from 40% loss to 1% loss can make a big difference. So anyway, invest in some of this stuff when you're doing planting and transplanting.
The name of that again?
Super Thrive, T-H-R-I-V-E.
Will it restore a sickly mountain laurel?
It depends on why the mountain laurel is sickly, but it is the best anti-shock thing that is out there. It will definitely help. It does not do reincarnation, but it comes pretty close. I say that, my first introduction to this stuff years ago, I worked with a wonderful gentleman, Alton Grimm, up in the hill country. We got in a shipment of cuttings that had been delayed in shipment. It was these lollipop plants, I still remember very distinctly, with the yellow flowers. I thought they were totally dead. There were 300 cuttings in a box, and they looked like just shriveled up nothing. Alton said, no, we'll plant them and water them with Super Thrive. I thought it was a waste of time, but I did it, watered them with Super Thrive, and out of 300 of them, 297 of them grew. So at that point, I started becoming a believer, and we've used it on things we thought were totally gone. A mountain laurel that is sick probably is staying too wet, if it's a plant that's been in for a while. Biggest enemy out there of mountain laurels is staying too wet. Last year, with 60 inches of rain, there were a lot of mountain laurels simply folded up and died. And that kind of brings us, to the next topic about doing your landscape planning. We talked about arrangement of things. We talked about having not a lot of grass. We talked about burning things up. We talked about considering mature size. In making your plant selections, of course, the biggest thing to remember in any given spot is, number one, how big is it going to get? Remember what the mature size is going to be, and never, ever go by what the little tag says or what any book says. I don't think they intentionally lie, but they just really don't know. Probably the most honest thing I've ever seen talking about plant size was from a native plant nursery, and they would have their little category out to the side that says size. And it would say, for instance, 4 to 5 feet, 12 feet in good soil. 2 to 3 feet, 6 feet in good soil. How big something gets is going to depend on how good or how bad your soil is, and a bit about our climate. The same crepe myrtle that grows 18 feet tall here is going to grow 30 feet tall in Houston. And that's why, I mean, these little stick-in tags, they're making one tag and putting it in plants they sell in the entire United States. So just throw those things away, because the information is either going to be misleading or wrong. Judge by, the experience of a professional that can help you. Go down to the botanical garden, see how big they get, look around your neighborhood, and once again, in choosing the plants that you're going to plug into this landscape plan that you're working on, if you see an ad somewhere for some plant that sounds too good to be true, like the Sunday supplement or something that came in the mail, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If you have not seen that plant growing in the area, there probably is a reason for it. And I'm all for getting new things and experimenting. But in your landscape, where you want to plant plants that are going to be there for a lot of years, be very careful to choose things that do well in this area. Again, there's a lot of junk sold out there. Silver maple, for instance. You stick a silver maple in the ground, it's probably going to grow 15 feet tall in the first 2 or 3 years. It's going to be beautiful for 4 to 7 years, and then it's going to fold up and die. Now, had you planted a better plant to begin with, you'd be well on your way. At this point, you're going to pull it up and start over. I drive around some of the neighborhoods in this area, and I look at these huge old Arizona ash that are right at the end of their lives and falling apart. And in one street, you see 150 of these trees and virtually nothing else. If those people had just planted some oak trees, just planted some elm trees, things like that, things would be getting better instead of just absolutely cratering. Another principle of the plants that you put into your landscape, this is especially true of trees, but I think it's very true of shrubs and a lot of other things as well. Do not plant too many of the same thing. If you have room for 6 trees in your yard, well, number one, you have a much bigger lot than most people. But if you have room for 6 trees, I'd like to see you have at least 5 different varieties in there. Unfortunately, somebody will say, I love live oaks, and they'll go plant 8 live oaks in their yard. Well, then you get oak wilt in the area, and you've got absolutely nothing. People in the Midwest planted elms everywhere. They got Dutch elm disease, and everything died. Diversity is really one of the biggest keys to long-term success in a landscape. Plus, it just makes it more interesting. The same thing applies to shrubs. How many people planted red-tip photinias 25 years ago when Steve George told us that they were the best plant that had ever come along? You notice that Steve George had to leave San Antonio later, and I think it's largely because of his recommendation of Chinese pistache and red-tip photinias. Because in typical extension service fashion, they made it sound like these things have no problems, they're the answer to every prayer, it's everything you want a plant to be, only they hadn't grown them for 10 years or 20 years or whatever to know all the problems they were susceptible to. But diversity in your plant material. Yes, ma'am.
How many people, especially being in gardening centers, because a lot of plants and shrubs are really pretty. But the big thing is, how aware are the nurseries of trying to make the people that they sell to aware of what are invasive plants, such as the ligustrum, and things like that?
Well, probably 60% of the plants today are sold by box stores, which could care less. All they want to do is sell. Chain stores. There was a very large chain here in San Antonio. The gentleman still owns the property that a lot of those nurseries, even though they've been through name changes, are on, but I won't call George by name. But anyway, he flat out said at a nurseryman's meeting one time, he says, my job is to sell plants. He said, it's not up to me to try to explain everything to people, which I thought was absolutely horrible, because if you wanted to grow it in the sun, man, it'd grow in the sun. If you wanted it for the shade, it'd tell you it was for the shade. And there are a few very honest, very ethical people around that will do their very best to, let you know what you're planting. But, if you're buying from someone other than a professional, you're going to get what you pay for, which is probably no advice at all. Occasionally an invasive plant is a good thing. You know, my friend Alton Greb taught me years ago, there's no such thing as a good plant or a bad plant. Every plant has good points and has bad points. Some of these plants, it's hard to find anything nice to say about them, but the important thing is understanding what your needs are and what you have to accomplish. If you can look out right through a super long lived tree, but we wanted shade there,